Throughout history, some leaders didn't just rule, they terrorized. These 11 monsters disguised as politicians didn't just make bad decisions. They orchestrated mass murder, torture, and genocide on scales that still shock us today. Buckle up, because this journey through humanity's darkest chapters will leave you speechless. Number 11, Saddam Hussein, Iraq. Chemical weapons, rape rooms, mass graves with thousands of bodies. Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq like a mafia boss with an army. And he proved that modern dictators can be just as brutal as ancient ones. Saddam Hussein took control of Iraq in 1979. He came from poverty and climbed through Iraq's brutal political system using violence and cunning. Once in power, he built a personality cult. His face was everywhere. Criticizing him meant death. Saddam's most infamous crime was the Anfal campaign against Kurdish people. In 1988, he ordered chemical weapon attacks on Kurdish villages. In Halabja, 5,000 people died in minutes from poison gas. Children's bodies littered the streets. Between 50,000 and 180,000 Kurds were killed, and thousands of villages were destroyed. Saddam created a network of prisons where opponents were tortured. Electric shocks, acid baths, and rape were common. His sons ran torture facilities where they personally brutalized victims. Political prisoners were thrown into industrial shredders while still alive. Saddam started 2 major wars. The Iran-Iraq War killed over 1 million people. His invasion of Kuwait led to the Gulf War. He drained the marshes in southern Iraq, destroying ancient wetlands and displacing 250,000 marsh Arabs. Estimated 250,000 to 500,000 Iraqis killed during his rule. Another million died in wars he started. Mass graves containing hundreds of thousands of bodies were discovered after his fall. U.S. forces invaded Iraq in 2003 and overthrew Saddam. He was found hiding in a hole in the ground. In 2006, he was tried for crimes against humanity and executed by hanging. He showed no remorse. Saddam Hussein was the last of history's megadictators. His execution in 2006 closed a dark chapter. But the lesson remains. Power without accountability always leads to cruelty. And the price? Millions of innocent lives. Number 10, Ivan the Terrible, Russia. His name says it all. Ivan the Terrible. He didn't earn that title through kindness. Russia's first Tsar had a temper so violent that he once killed his own son in a fit of rage. And that was far from his worst act. Ivan IV became Grand Prince of Moscow at age 3 in 1533. He was crowned Russia's first Tsar in 1547. His early reign showed promise. He expanded Russia's territory and reformed the government. But after his beloved wife died in 1560, something broke inside him. Ivan created the Oprichnina, a personal army of 6,000 men dressed in black who terrorized Russia. They could arrest, torture, and kill anyone Ivan suspected of treason. In 1570, Ivan believed the city of Novgorod was plotting against him. He surrounded the city and unleashed hell. For 5 weeks, his forces massacred between 3,000 and 30,000 people. Men were roasted alive on spits. Women and children were tied to sleds and pushed into freezing rivers. Ivan personally participated, beating people to death with his iron-tipped staff. He gouged out eyes, boiled people alive, and had others tied to barrels of gunpowder and blown up. In 1581, during an argument, Ivan struck his pregnant daughter-in-law, causing a miscarriage. When his son confronted him, Ivan hit him in the head with his staff, killing him instantly. Estimated 60,000 people died during Ivan's reign of terror. The Novgorod massacre alone destroyed one of Russia's greatest cities. His paranoia crippled the Russian state. Ivan died in 1584 while playing chess. Some historians believe he was poisoned. His death ended his personal terror, but Russia was left devastated and weak. Ivan the Terrible showed what happens when absolute power meets mental instability. But our final dictator brought modern technology to ancient cruelty. Number 9, Idi Amin, Uganda. Imagine a dictator so paranoid that he kept the heads of his enemies in his refrigerator. A man who allegedly ate human flesh and fed political opponents to crocodiles. Idi Amin was Uganda's nightmare, and he ruled with chaotic, unpredictable violence. Amin was a military officer who seized power in Uganda through a coup in 1971. At first, Ugandans celebrated. The previous leader had been oppressive, but Amin quickly proved to be far worse. He declared himself president for life and gave himself military medals he never earned. Amin's paranoia drove his violence. He He purged the military of anyone from tribes he didn't trust. Soldiers were lined up and shot with sledgehammers to save ammunition. He expelled 60,000 Asians from Uganda, stealing their businesses and wealth. His secret police, the State Research Bureau, kidnapped people in the middle of the night. Victims were tortured in horrific ways. Bodies were dumped in rivers or fed to crocodiles. Amin personally participated in torture sessions. Some say he practiced cannibalism, though this was never proven. He murdered the archbishop and 2 cabinet ministers, then had their bodies displayed. Between 300,000 and 500,000 Ugandans died during his 8-year rule. Up to 500,000 deaths in 8 years. That's nearly 200 people killed every single day. Uganda's economy collapsed, and the country descended into chaos. In 1979, Amin invaded Tanzania. Tanzania fought back and overthrew him. Amin fled to Libya, then Saudi Arabia, where he lived comfortably until dying of natural causes in 2003. He never faced trial. Amin's madness was random and terrifying. But our next ruler? His cruelty was calculated, systematic, and lasted decades. Meet Russia's original tyrant. Number 8, Kim Il-sung, North Korea. What if a dictator could torture not just you, but your children and grandchildren for crimes you committed? In North Korea, that's reality. Kim Il-sung created a dynasty of darkness where entire families are punished for 3 generations. Kim Il-sung took power in North Korea in 1948 with Soviet backing. He portrayed himself as a godlike figure who liberated Korea. The reality? He created the world's most isolated and oppressive state. His cult of personality was so extreme that every home had to display his portrait. Kim created a caste system dividing citizens into loyal, wavering, and hostile classes. If you were classified as hostile, your family would suffer forever. He built political prison camps where entire families were sent for minor infractions. Children born in these camps never knew freedom. They worked as slaves, starved, and were tortured. If you tried to escape and failed, you were publicly executed. Your family watched, then they were punished too. Kim's policies caused famines that killed hundreds of thousands. While people starved, he lived in luxury palaces. He started the Korean War, which killed millions. After the war, he purged anyone he suspected of disloyalty. Estimated 1.6 million North Koreans died under Kim Il-sung's rule from executions, starvation, and prison camps. Today, 200,000 people still suffer in these camps. His dynasty continues through his son and grandson. Kim Il-sung died of a heart attack in 1994. He never faced justice. North Korea declared him eternal president. His preserved body is displayed in a mausoleum where citizens must bow to it. Kim Il-sung's legacy of oppression lives on. But our next dictator brought African brutality to new heights with paranoia and madness. Number 7, Vlad the Impaler, Wallachia. Ever wonder where Dracula came from? The legend started with a real prince who was far more terrifying than any vampire. Vlad the Impaler earned his nickname through sheer brutality. And his favorite method of execution? You can probably guess. Vlad III ruled Wallachia in modern Romania during the 1400s. He spent his childhood as a hostage of the Ottoman Empire, where he witnessed torture and violence daily. When he took power in 1456, those experiences shaped his brutal rule. Vlad's signature method was impalement. Victims were placed on long wooden stakes that slowly pierced through their bodies. The stakes were carefully positioned to avoid vital organs, so victims would suffer for hours or even days before dying. He impaled thousands of people and displayed them along roads as warnings. When Ottoman ambassadors refused to remove their turbans, Vlad had the turbans nailed to their heads. He once invited poor and sick people to a feast, then locked the doors and burned the building down. He said he was freeing them from suffering. When invading Ottoman forces found a forest of 20,000 impaled bodies, they turned back in horror. Vlad killed between 40,000 and 100,000 people during his reign. Up to 100,000 deaths in just 6 years of rule. His cruelty was so excessive that stories about him spread across Europe for centuries. Vlad was killed in battle in 1476. Some say his own men assassinated him. His head was cut off and sent to the Ottoman Sultan as proof of his death. Vlad's cruelty was personal and creative. But our next dictator built an entire system designed to crush generations. And his legacy of oppression continues today. Number 6, Genghis Khan, Mongol Empire. Before Hitler, before Stalin, there was a conqueror so ruthless that his name still sends chills down spines 800 years later. Genghis Khan built the largest empire in history, and he did it by leaving mountains of skulls in his wake. Born as Temujin in 1162, Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes and created history's most feared army. His cavalry could travel 60 miles a day. His archers could shoot accurately while riding at full speed. Cities that heard the Mongols were coming often surrendered immediately. Those that didn't regretted it. Genghis Khan had a simple rule: surrender or die. Cities that resisted were completely destroyed. Every man, woman, and child was killed. In Nishapur, his soldiers beheaded the entire population and stacked their skulls into pyramids. The city of Urgench saw its 100,000 residents massacred, and the city was flooded to erase it from existence. His armies used psychological warfare. They'd spare one person to run to the next city and spread terror. Sometimes they used civilians as human shields in battle. Between 1206 and 1227, Genghis Khan's conquests killed an estimated 40 million people. That was 11% of the world's population at the time. 40 million deaths. Entire civilizations erased. So many people died that forests grew back over farmland, actually cooling the Earth's climate. His impact was visible from space. Genghis Khan died in 1227, possibly from injuries after falling from his horse. He was buried in a secret location that has never been found. His empire continued expanding after his death. Genghis Khan conquered with strategy and terror. But our next ruler? He conquered with pure, creative cruelty. His methods were so horrific, they inspired vampire legends. Number 5. Leopold II, Belgium/Congo. What's worse than a dictator who kills for power? A king who kills for profit. Leopold II turned the Congo into his personal piggy bank. And the price? 10 million African lives. This is the story of greed taken to its darkest extreme. Leopold II became King of Belgium in 1865. Belgium was small, and Leopold wanted an empire. He convinced other European powers to give him control of the Congo in 1885. He promised to bring civilization and end slavery. Instead, he brought horror on an industrial scale. Leopold wanted rubber. Lots of it. His soldiers forced Congolese people to harvest rubber in the jungle. Families were given impossible quotas. If they didn't collect enough, soldiers would cut off their hands, feet, or heads. Children were mutilated in front of their parents to motivate them to work harder. Villages that resisted were burned. Women were held hostage to force men to work. Soldiers had to prove they hadn't wasted bullets by bringing back severed hands. Some soldiers cut off hands from living people to meet their quotas. Starvation and disease killed millions more. Between 10 and 15 million Congolese died under Leopold's rule. 10 to 15 million deaths. Half the Congo's population was wiped out in just 23 years. All for rubber profits that made Leopold one of the richest men in Europe. International pressure finally forced Leopold to give up the Congo in 1908. He sold it to Belgium and died the next year. He spent his final years building monuments to himself and never faced consequences. Leopold proved that monsters don't always look like dictators. Sometimes they wear crowns. But our next ruler makes Leopold look civilized. He wasn't just cruel. He was legendary for it. Number 4, Pol Pot, Cambodia. Imagine a leader who thought glasses made you an enemy of the state. Wearing glasses meant you could read. Reading meant you were educated. And educated people? They had to die. Pol Pot turned Cambodia into a nightmare where intelligence was a death sentence. Pol Pot led the Khmer Rouge, a communist group that took control of Cambodia in 1975. He wanted to create an agricultural paradise by returning society to year zero. That meant erasing everything modern. Cities were emptied overnight. Hospitals, schools, and banks were shut down. Money became worthless. Pol Pot soldiers forced millions from cities into the countryside to work as slaves on farms. Families were separated. Children were taken from parents and trained as soldiers. Anyone who looked educated was killed. Teachers, doctors, engineers, even people who spoke foreign languages were executed. The genocide targeted ethnic Vietnamese, Chinese, and Muslims. Victims were taken to the killing fields, where they were beaten to death with farming tools to save bullets. Over 4 years, Pol Pot killed 2 million people. That was 25% of Cambodia's entire population. 2 million deaths in just 4 years. 1 in 4 Cambodians murdered. Entire generations of educated people wiped out. Cambodia still hasn't fully recovered. Vietnam invaded Cambodia in 1979 and forced Pol Pot to flee. He hid in the jungle for nearly 20 years. He died in 1998 under house arrest, never facing justice. He never admitted his crimes or showed remorse. Pol Pot proved that revolution without reason leads to madness. But our next monster didn't need political ideology. He just wanted wealth, and he'd torture millions to get it. Number 3, Mao Zedong, China. Picture this, a famine so severe that people resorted to eating tree bark, grass, and even human flesh. Now imagine this famine wasn't caused by drought or natural disaster. It was caused by one man's terrible ideas. Mao Zedong wanted to transform China into a superpower overnight. Instead, he created the deadliest famine in human history. Mao was born in 1893 in rural China. He became a communist revolutionary and fought a civil war to take control of China. In 1949, he won and established the People's Republic of China. Chinese people hoped for a better life after decades of war. Mao promised prosperity and equality. What they got was catastrophe after catastrophe. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward. His plan was to rapidly industrialize China by forcing farmers to make steel in their backyards. Sounds crazy? It was. Farmers abandoned their crops to melt down farming tools into useless steel. Without anyone farming, food production collapsed. But here's the twisted part. Mao refused to admit his mistake. Local officials, terrified of punishment, lied about harvest numbers. They reported massive crop yields that didn't exist. Based on these fake numbers, the government seized grain from starving villages to sell abroad. People began dying by the millions. Between 1959 and 1962, an estimated 45 to 55 million Chinese people starved to death. In some villages, entire populations were wiped out. Reports emerged of parents eating their own children's bodies. Mao knew about the famine but did nothing. He said death was necessary for progress. Then came the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Mao encouraged young people to attack anyone he considered an enemy. Teachers, doctors, and intellectuals were publicly humiliated, beaten, and killed. Ancient temples were destroyed. Books were burned. Families turned on each other. Mao's policies killed an estimated 45 to 55 million during the Great Leap Forward alone. Add another 2 to 3 million during the Cultural Revolution. In total, Mao was responsible for up to 60 million deaths. That makes him potentially the deadliest leader in human history. Mao died of natural causes in 1976. He was never held accountable for his crimes. Today, his portrait still hangs in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. China acknowledges he made mistakes, but still honors him as the founder of modern China. Justice? None whatsoever. Mao proved that good intentions mean nothing without common sense. His ideas killed more people than both world wars combined. But our next leader didn't hide behind ideology. He was openly, proudly brutal. And he targeted his own people with surgical precision. Number 2, Joseph Stalin, Soviet Union. What if I told you there was a leader who killed more people than Hitler? And most of his victims weren't enemies. They were his own citizens. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist. His paranoia was legendary. His cruelty was systematic. And his death toll? It's staggering. Stalin was born in Georgia in 1878. His real name was Iosif Jugashvili, but he took the name Stalin, which means man of steel. He was a bank robber and revolutionary before climbing to the top of Soviet power. After Lenin died in 1924, Stalin eliminated his rivals one by one. By 1929, he had total control. People thought he'd build a workers' paradise. Instead, he built a prison state. Stalin's terror came in waves. First, he forced collectivization on farmers. He seized their land and crops, causing massive famines. In Ukraine alone, 4 to 7 million people starved to death in what's called the Holodomor. Parents watched their children die of hunger, while Soviet guards stood over full grain warehouses. Then came the Great Purge. Stalin became obsessed with eliminating enemies of the state. He arrested millions of people on false charges. Show trials were held where victims confessed to crimes they didn't commit after brutal torture. Entire families were destroyed. If you were arrested, your spouse and children could be sent to gulags too. These were frozen labor camps in Siberia where prisoners worked until they died. You could be sent there for telling a joke about Stalin. The lucky ones died quickly from cold or starvation. Others suffered for years. Stalin even killed his own generals, his top party members, and his friends. Nobody was safe. Historians estimate Stalin killed between 20 and 25 million Soviet citizens. That includes 6 million in famines, 1 million executed during purges, and millions more who died in gulags. He ruled for nearly 30 years. That's almost 1 million deaths per year. Unlike Hitler, Stalin died peacefully in his bed in 1953. He had a stroke, and his guards were too afraid to check on him for hours. He might have survived if they'd gotten help sooner. But nobody wanted to be the one to open that door. After his death, Soviet leaders admitted his crimes and removed his body from public display. Stalin proved that you don't need to invade other countries to be a mass murderer. Sometimes the worst enemy is the one already in power. But our next dictator took oppression to a whole new level, killing nearly a quarter of his own population. Number 1, Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany. Imagine a man so evil that his name became synonymous with pure evil itself. A failed artist who turned into history's most notorious mass murderer. Adolf Hitler didn't just start a war. He created an industrial machine designed for one purpose: genocide. And the numbers? They're almost impossible to believe. Hitler was born in Austria in 1889. He dreamed of becoming an artist, but was rejected from art school twice. After Germany lost World War I, Hitler blamed Jewish people and other minorities for the country's problems. He joined a small political party and used fear and propaganda to rise to power. In 1933, he became Germany's chancellor. Germans thought he'd fix their economy. Instead, he gave them hell. Here's where it gets truly dark. Hitler created concentration camps across Europe. These weren't prisons. They were death factories. Jewish families were torn from their homes, packed into cattle cars, and shipped to places like Auschwitz. When they arrived, Nazi guards separated children from parents. Most went straight to gas chambers disguised as showers. 6 million Jews were murdered this way. But Hitler didn't stop there. He killed Roma people, disabled individuals, gay people, and political opponents. His doctors performed horrific experiments on prisoners without anesthesia. Children were injected with diseases. Twins were sewn together to create conjoined twins. People were frozen alive to test cold weather survival. The cruelty wasn't just systematic. It was scientific. Hitler also started World War II, which killed between 70 and 85 million people worldwide. That's more deaths than any other conflict in human history. Let that sink in. 6 million Jews in the Holocaust alone. Add another 11 million victims from other groups. Then 70 to 85 million from the war itself. In just 12 years, Hitler's regime was responsible for nearly 100 million deaths. That's like wiping out the entire population of Germany 3 times over. By 1945, Allied forces were closing in on Berlin. Hitler knew he'd lost. On April 30th, he took a coward's way out. He shot himself in his underground bunker. His body was burned, and Germany finally surrendered. Justice? Not really. He never faced trial for his crimes. Hitler set the bar for human evil in the modern world. But believe it or not, our next dictator killed even more of his own people. And he did it while smiling for propaganda photos. Meet Joseph Stalin.